Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Dairy Signal where we have the ability to bring forward a lot of cutting edge, leading topics, things that are top of mind, not only for you as a fellow dairy farmer, but oftentimes a lot of our fellow dairy industry partners. So, thank you for tuning in to an episode of the Dairy Signal. If you're not familiar with this platform, welcome. But I also encourage you to ask your questions throughout. That's what truly makes it a dialogue and less of a monologue, is if you engage just as much as I, the moderator, throughout the day. So you can ask those questions through that dot button towards the bottom of your screen and join in today's discussion as well. For those that are listening to the recording, by all means, reach out to us so that we can get you connected with the experts throughout any of the segments. We want to, again, make sure that you get connected to all the resources to help you succeed. As we go out throughout today's segment, and honestly, really all of our Dairy Signal episodes, I want to do a special shout out and thank you to our national partners who help make not only the Dairy Signal, but all of the programs and initiatives that PBPW is able to put on throughout the calendar year. Thank you for your support. Not only for supporting the organization of professional dairy producers, but also supporting our fellow dairy farmers. We appreciate everything that you do. And throughout this month of April, an extra shout out or special, if you will, to our Signal sponsor. So DFL. DFL has been our sponsor, our partner throughout the month of April, and they're committed to supporting dairy producers and dealers with genetics and varieties that have come through Dairyland and Pioneer. So thank you guys. They're a global leader in forage, seed research, development, production, and distribution. So again, appreciate DLF for sponsoring the month of April and the Dairy Signal. As we transition into today's episode, we're really going to be honing in on probably top of mind as we've been doing all sorts of weather, and spring has been all sorts of fun here, not only in the Midwest, but really across the country here. So we're going to dial in and really talk about not only your alfalfa stands, where did we come through or come out of from this last fall, or excuse me, this last winter, but then also kind of tip into the discussion of corn silage. What can we manage? What should we look forward to into this growing season? And to do that discussion, we're really honored and excited to have Bob Willems here with another great partner of ours with Rank Seeds. So Bob Willems, he's the Northeast Wisconsin District Sales Manager. So without further ado, Bob, I'll let you do a little further introduction on yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Willems. I've been with Rank Seed for a number of years. Um, Started out in research and then segued into sales a long time ago. And I work and live in northeastern Wisconsin, so I probably cover about 14 or 15 counties in that corner of the state, if you will. So I kind of travel a little bit of ground and get to see different things. So um, hopefully that perspective will shine through for some people. But I don't get to go to New York or Pennsylvania or whatever, where a lot of your audience might be listening, as far as northeastern Wisconsin, hopefully I can shed some light on what's going on.
Absolutely. You definitely got the lowdown for that area. And Wisconsin even hit the map this last week, unfortunately, if you want to think about it. You
Yeah.
know, it's extreme when you hit the national news about weather. So let's dive in because weather, it's just that uncontrollable. She's going to do what she wants. But let's talk as we've come through now 2025, the winter, where you're finally in 2026. We're looking forward to spring. I don't know about your neck of the woods, but things are finally looking green.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those alfalfa stands. Where do we stand now, even from what we came through with the floods, and just how did we survive winter? What are we looking at and what should we look forward to?
So what I've seen so far is it seems like we've come through winter pretty well.
Okay.
A lot of the stands are starting to green up. I have had a few growers indicate they got some issues, and
Mhm.
it just happened because as things are starting to green up, I've had a few phone calls just since the weekend, basically, where a couple people have some issues. I'll have to investigate. Haven't quite made it there yet.
Mhm.
Um, but generally speaking, the plants seem to be there. They seem to be greening up. And then if you have an opportunity to get out there and dig up a few plants, you should find, hopefully healthy um, white roots, that are somewhat firm, I guess would be a good way to say it, where they would be maybe look like the inside of a potato, um, you
Okay.
know, and not really have any hollowness to them or discoloration or ropiness. And hopefully you'll see that the crown will be nice and symmetrical, shooting off um, shoots in all directions. Sometimes on older stands, you'll see that the crown will maybe be dead or hindered heavily on one or two or sides of it, but it might grow on one side. While in that case, you'll probably have, an okay production year out of it, but it's probably a dying plant in that regard. And on older stand, you kind of expect that, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, so let's talk about some of those trouble areas. Obviously, you had some folks calling you. Were they hinting at some of those issues that are starting to pop up? Or you're like, I don't know until I'm on site. How do you
Yeah, kind
troubleshoot
of. It was like Sunday, Monday, I think is when it was. And I haven't been able to get there yet. It's only Tuesday. I think tomorrow's the big day. But uh it sounded like some stands were greening up and others were a little suffering a little. And it may have had something to do with like water standing and then
that?
you know from maybe this last storm. I don't know. I gotta check it out. But generally speaking, that's not the norm this year.
Okay.
Most guys have really nice stands coming at this point. We've only really just started greening up in the last, what is it? Maybe the last 10 days or so, 15 days, and it's really come on nice. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'd say being a Eastern Wisconsinite myself, I can finally say we see green and
Yeah.
it's slowly starting to wake up versus a couple weeks ago, I had the ability to be out in Pennsylvania and I feel like they're almost a month ahead of us as far as their green. I
Wow.
am slightly jealous, but I have to keep that green-eyed monster to myself. But as we do look at that, I mean, Wisconsin was no stranger to the rain that came through. I mean, obviously you can't control nature. But moving forward, as we're looking through that, and hopefully some of that water is gonna drain away,
Mhm.
is there anything that we can do to help to assist? Something that would have been flooded out? Like, is it a replant? Do you just give it time? How do you make those calls, those assessments?
So a lot of times, like dead is dead. I mean, it's a real simple call because like the
Yes or
stuff
no?
just,
Okay.
yeah, the stuff isn't growing. But and so there, you would jump into a new plan. But
Okay.
where I think a lot, and I think that's where a couple of growers have some issues that I need to go check out,
Mhm.
is they might have had some damage, and that can be more difficult than that can be more of a problem than just maybe a dead field because like it's like what do you do with it because the winter injury
Mhm.
issue is a matter of like profitability for the farmer, because they're going to have like a less productive stand. There's going to be less vigor, slower
Mhm.
growth in the spring, and then it may be a situation where it's just delaying the death that's going to come at some point, like especially maybe even after they take a crop. Like the first crop might be there.
Mhm.
And then they harvest that, and then it really peters out. And then now it's like June 15th or 12th or whatever, if they cut at the end of May and they're looking at it like, oh, what do we do now? Where they could have maybe done something a little bit earlier if it was indeed that bad. So like um delayed death or just that winter injury problem is something that is harder to give somebody a direction than it is if it's just dead. If it's dead, nobody's happy, and it's just like, what do we do to move forward? If it's injured, it's like, what do we do to make this land productive? Because a lot of times people are paying $250 an acre to rent a farm. They can't have a half or three-quarter or a quarter of a stand. They need productive land when they're paying big rents or whatever. So then if they do have an issue like that and the stand is say moderate or it's not dead, but it's not just horrible yet either.
Mhm.
Um, they can interseed some grasses per se.
Okay.
Like say Festolium would help because that if it'll give like all grasses, it'll give you a big first cutting. But what
Hmm.
I've seen with like Festolium is, which is like a cross between perennial rye and fescue, it does add well, it's okay product for quality, for like a dairy herd. It's for grass, it's pretty good quality. But then if you get an adequate amount of moisture in, say, the midsummer,
Hmm.
it'll give you a decent second cutting per se. Like a lot of grasses are kind of like one and done in the summer. You get a big
Okay.
flush of grass, cut it, harvest it, and then if you don't get any rain, there's nothing there really, and it just kind of hangs in. Then another thing that a guy could do or a grower could do would be to plant something like, if, especially like for a dairy herd, where you want some sort of quality feed.
Hmm.
And it's like getting late. Like, let's say you took that first crop off to see if that stand was going to make it, and then it just kind of crashed on you.
Yeah.
You could come in with like a BMR Soren Sudan grass type product, which would be like a low lignin Sudan grass, which that tons up pretty nice, would be an okay quality or decent quality product. Um, and probably maybe like if the alfalfa field is dead, or you're going to pull the trigger and take it out early, I'm thinking you're probably further ahead by planting corn silage, a
Mm.
variety of corn, because you're going to get decent quality. You're going to have great tonnage, even if it's planted,
Mhm.
as a plan B, so to speak, you know. Then that would probably be um, the maybe the best route to go. But
Okay.
those
And then
those would be the options I would lay out for somebody, I guess, is what I'm saying. You
sure.
know.
So in both of these cases, just for my clarity, I apologize. When we're talking delayed death or like even a field like dead spots, you're calling it a complete loss, not like patches within the field, but you're like scrap the whole field if you need to interseed, that kind of concept. Was I following that thought or
Well,
did I miss something?
yeah, well, I guess let me try it again because maybe yeah. So, like, if it's dead, it's dead. But then there's always these times where there's like a thin stand or there's dead pockets. Like a
Right.
lot of growers will have, um, like the low spots didn't make it, or
Hmm.
sometimes it's the high spots for whatever reason. But I mean, there's places in the field that are dead. That would
Hmm.
probably be a place to go with like a grass seeding, like
Okay.
something else. You could also use another legume like red clover. I didn't mention that.
Sure.
If it's more than a year old, you don't want to come back in with alfalfa because of the autotoxicity issue. So then if it's more, I always just figure like more than 12 months old from the planting time, you have that allelopathic effect from, that the alfalfa itself gives off to kill or to not allow the germination of alfalfa seed. But you could dump some red clover in there, and that would be like a similar type product, that would be like in those areas where you have um like dead spots, low spots that didn't come real good,
Mhm.
or however that works. Um, so yeah, if it was just patching, I would go with just patching.
Okay.
If the whole field is just marginal, like it's
Mhm.
petering out,
Sure.
then you again, that's why I kind of went like one, two, and three with I did it backwards, like like the grass is maybe first, then if you're starting over, then go with like, and it's late, like after you took that first crop, and it's like, so let's say it's June 5th or something, and you're like, oh, now what do I do? Then maybe Soren Sudan would work. And that, but if the field is questionable, and maybe we should drop the counts on that, kind of like if you have less than 4 plants per square foot, you're probably looking at a stand that's out of gas. Um, 4 to 6 is what you should see. Or if you count the little shoots, you should see 40 shoots to 55. That would be like a stand that is still hanging in there. You should have more than 55 would be the place you want to be on the shoots. Um, then I'm trying to think. Let's see, it would probably be like 15 to 25 plants after the seeding year, and then it would drop down to about six in the second year, I guess is what I'm going with on that. So you'll kind of see, and then it should hang in there at like 6 plants. 5, 6 plants per square foot. If you get below that, you should start thinking about what you're going to do. And then from the shoot count standpoint, 55 shoots. And then if you're in that 40 to 55, you still have a viable alfalfa field. And then if you're below that, then you need to do one of those things. So that we talked about. Does that make sense? Or is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
I appreciate the clarity. So then if say it was a complete loss, it was just a bad day for that field kind of
Yeah.
concept. And you do recommend more on the drastic side of like the maybe do a short day corn silage if we go
Yeah,
that
yeah, I
route.
think so. I think they'll be better off in the end. It'll be more profitable for them to go
Okay.
with like a corn silage type product.
Because at
Yeah.
that point, then obviously you're more corn silage, but then you're also losing the roughage from the haylage kind of concept. So hopefully you're either working with your neighbor or maybe you had enough reserve. Is that
Well,
more or
yeah.
less the assumption there then?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
where I was going was I was trying to find the most benefit for the land or where the land would give you the most return, and
Sure,
I think corn
absolutely.
silage would work. But then when it comes to balancing aeration, there's other factors involved. And hopefully they do have other alfalfa fields
Mhm.
that are out there elsewhere. And another thing too, if it's an older stand, um, you have that benefit of the nitrogen credit from that alfalfa. So if you come with corn, it should give you a nice corn crop,
Hmm.
um, without necessarily having to crank up the input, so to speak.
That's definitely one of those days where you're glad you have your nutritionist on speed dial.
Yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
let's talk this through. Absolutely. So theoretically, I mean, as we're still greening up here in Wisconsin, there's still a chance to say like alfalfa stands got, medium or hit or miss. But from the general assumption here is at least here in Wisconsin pocket of the Midwest, seems like we wintered okay.
I think so. It seems like
Theoretically, we're
it.
going to come
Yeah.
out of this
Yeah.
okay. Mother Nature might be fun yet, but for all things considered, we should be okay. So let's just talk real quick for people's folks in mind of taking care of these stands. Going through this growing season, what should we be mindful of, or just like as we get ready? I shouldn't even say get ready because we're hardly into spring, but as we think about going in and prep for like the winter, so overwintering, what are those factors that really play into theoretically, you only have so much control, but if it's going to
Yeah.
come out, if it had wintered okay, like what things all factor into that?
Yeah. So I suppose like to that question, I think you would start the year before.
Okay.
Like you would start with like when you harvest your alfalfa, the season, let's say it's, a stand that's like a year old or something. So you harvest, your however many cuttings, like 5 cuttings or 4 cuttings, whatever it is. Then you would want to make sure you feed it, each time you're harvesting it to replace the nutrients that the crop removed. And then, potash being like a key
Mhm.
nutrient that that plant is going to need. So if you keep that part of it up and fertilize it adequately, and then if you roll into September, get the harvest done like before the first few days of September, leave it set the rest of the month, and then let it have 5, 6 weeks to build up carbohydrates in the roots for the root reserves for it to overwinter. So then that when it comes out in spring, it'll and wakes up, it'll have adequate root reserves and that sort of thing. Um, Does that answer the question? Is that
I think so. And it triggered a follow-up if you don't mind. So let's
no,
say
go
we
for it.
had a long fall or it was just
Mhm.
that Indian summer. At what
Yep.
point do you ever worry about your stand getting too long? Is that such a thing
Oh,
going
that
into
is
the
a
winter?
yeah. Um, yeah. I know I've heard it from farmers that have, saw their alfalfa just flourishing into a fall and they're like, well, I'm not gonna leave it because I know that I don't know what the winter's gonna bring and I know there's a crop there and I'm not gonna waste it. Um, So I know personally guys that will take that off. I don't think there's anything wrong with like October cutting or anything like that, but the idea would also be that you would want to make sure you wouldn't cut it down to the ground, you wouldn't scalp it or whatever. You would want to
Mhm.
make sure there's um, enough there to catch snow, and some guys even leave strips, as they're cutting. You've seen that, I'm sure. And
Yes.
that is, so that the snow will catch behind that and it'll help build up snow cover,
Okay.
which is very beneficial, obviously. But yeah, if I'm not a fan of like scalping it right to the ground like you do, say, the rest of the year. Maybe you probably want to leave a little bit out there to catch snow and
Sure.
things. So,
Okay. Just something, a fun fact to keep in the back
no,
of the
it's
mind as we
yeah,
come into when we finally get there to late
yeah,
summer, early fall
sure.
conversations. No, that was a good clarity. Any questions in this alfalfa discussion or comments that you want to leave with our listeners right now? Because I know there's some other topics that you wanted to get to, and I'm intrigued to listen on. So I don't want to hold you back before we
Oh no,
transition
you're
out.
good. I'm just going with the flow. So,
Okay.
but
Well, then
but
let's keep
oh,
it moving. Oh, nope. If you have
I
something,
was just gonna
shout her
say,
out,
just to
Bob.
summarize, like alfalfa is a great crop, that's not grown as prevalently as it used to be, let's say, because of the large dairy herds. They need more tonnage,
Hmm.
but there are definitely benefits nutritionally and agronomically, and then just it's a great uh adds flexibility um uh, because you can, you do dry hay or haylage or sometimes farmers will even graze it, so it's somewhat of an adaptable product that to have out there, but agronomically it does a lot for the soil. It breaks up compaction because we are talking about a lot of larger farms where you have large equipment going across, so that taproot going down will break up the hard pan. It'll improve the soil health and structure and help with water penetration and things of that nature. And of course, like we talked about, you'll get the nitrogen credit, so it's really neat that way. It's a good product. We should never really stop using it. It also is, it has great nutritional value, adds a lot of crude protein to the ration, 18, 20% easily. Um, and the digestibility of the fiber makes it easier for cows to consume more feed, and more feed equals more milk usually, right?
Hmm.
So and it'll improve the rumen health of the animal. And there's all kinds of wonderful things about alfalfa that we should consider, and not necessarily just drop that as a product, and then again, we also have like new diseases coming in like tar spot and things like that. And that would also be an awesome product that way to maybe break up some of those disease cycles like tar spot, I hope, or white mold in soybeans. I mean, it's just things like that. So if I was to summarize what we were talking about, that's how I would kind of conclude, I guess.
I like it. I appreciate that too. Which is I think a good segue or a good way to launch into the next discussion, which is corn silage, but a little bit more specifically tying into the BMR discussion and the fact that for our listeners, if you're not already blue in the space of the, oh my gosh, move on, I promise you it's still relevant. I mean, you're getting questions on it, I'm sure here, Bob,
Mhm.
but it's still the, if we haven't hoarded away our seed and still have this miraculous inventory sitting somewhere, there's still folks of the, yes, we may have purchased our seed for this year, but how do I adjust? How do I ensure I'm still getting that quality, that digestibility, things like that as we move forward? And then how do you manage? Is there different practices that we need to consider if you're as you shift away from BMR and into some more of these other seeds? what should we be considering? So let's dive in here, Bob.
All right, let's see if we can sort it all out.
Yes,
So
please.
BMR is an awesome product for the fiber digestibility advantages it brought to the table. Um, there are, also like with everything, it doesn't matter what you do, and it seems like with corn products or whatever, you get something, you always give something up. It seems like, and that just requires challenges in management, I suppose. So like with the BMR, you get this awesome low lignin product that is great for making milk, but it also requires, if you're going to totally utilize it, you would need to say segregate that feed, like, and I know a lot of guys that just make these massive piles and stuff, and it could be good and bad, and and that then I suppose they just sort it out with supplements or whatever, and create a ration out of it. But with the BMR, it was an awesome product again, for the quality. But now it appears that that is no longer an option. So now we got to kind of go back to maybe the basics on how we did things before 1996 or 8 or whatever year it was when they
Sure.
hit the market. So what would we do? We would probably look for something that has the yield, but also the agronomics and the standability issues and the disease tolerance. When I say agronomics, I guess that would be that. It'd be just roping all of that together. But then you also want to have good digestibility, and you want to have good starch content, and all these different factors that come into what it takes to put it all together. So with that, we all want to like look into um, finding products that are going to meet all those needs. And I guess I'm trailing off a little bit, but I'll try to pull it back. The idea is like when you replace something, you want to take that opportunity to not lose that quality. And then you can maybe do that by looking at products that are tested. And if you have a seed supplier that has looked into that, not just done grain testing, but done silage testing as well, then you can build up a database to operate from, and that would be where you could find out whether it has good quality numbers like milk per ton, as well as good quality quantity numbers like milk per acre, and then looking at the starch content, as I was saying, and that sort of thing, and tie all those factors together, but then have a product that maybe is more resilient in the field with less disease issues on the leaves, maybe less standability issues because you haven't pulled all the lignin out. And then you can maybe achieve great digestibility with a softer starch kernel,
Okay.
which would be able to be absorbed by the animal as opposed to just passing through the animal. So those are some factors that the grower would need to maybe address with the changes coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the other things or benefits or perceived benefits of the BMR was that your harvest window was slightly longer. You didn't have to rush in and get it at like day one because
Oh,
all of a sudden your starch digestibility was just going to tank because things dried off. Are we seeing that that window still exists with some of these new plant breeds that are coming through, obviously away from the BMR corn, but are you seeing it from your standpoint as with these new selections or these new crossbreeds?
well, I would say that harvest timing is crucial no matter what the product per se, um,
Absolutely.
because that's one of the things that I've learned just from doing silage plots with growers, and I started doing them like probably like 20 plus years ago. And the thought process was, if I remember back then, was like, well, if I plant a 110 day corn for corn silage, I'm going to get all this tonnage and I'm going to get all this, eh, these attributes for good corn silage. And um, then on the other hand, if you plant a really early product, you're going to be giving up so much. And what I learned from doing the plots is like for my area, I don't know what it would be like in different geographies, but in my area, I found there's like a sweet spot on the bat where if the grower is planting something between, let's say, 97, 98 day to 104 day, let's say, it they got they got excellent opportunity for tonnage and quality, but it all comes down to the harvest window, getting it at the right moisture. So if they're putting it in a bunker, they're going to probably want to be like at 65, 70%.
Mhm.
If they're in an upright, it's probably going to be more around the 62-ish, 60, whatever, you don't want it running. Um, and so I've I just found and then the people I was working with were like, I don't want these 110-day corns in my plot because I have to worry about how they're feeding out, because there's all this feed and stuff. And then on the other hand, the earlier corns, because years ago I used to kind of try to do this bigger window of corn maturities. And the early corns, yeah, they work for some farmers, they need those, they need to know what they are. But overall, um, if I just like for a silage plot, just put 97 to 104-day corn in it, plus or minus, it seems to be what will bring the best results for that grower in that area. There will be farmers that plant earlier corn because of the need or whatever, and there will be growers that plant a little bit longer. But I've noticed that um, it's not the maturity as much as the harvest date, getting the right moisture, getting the right quality. Um, um, I don't know if that answers the question or if I got a little wordy, sorry about that.
No, I think so. If I'm overgeneralizing, please step in, but it's more
No,
or
you're
less
fine.
still have to pay attention to that window. You can't
Yeah.
ignore it and just be like, you know what, next week is fine. It's just that when you hit your window, you hit your window and you got to go. That hasn't
What?
changed
Yeah.
regardless of what you're
And
working with.
just for an example, I don't know how else to like maybe illustrate it, but like I when I've done my silage plots, I try to use the same varieties, because I'm trying to build, like a data set.
Sure.
And so every once in a while there will be a problem. And so one guy can't get his plot off, and it's like 55% moisture it's harvested at. And
Mhm.
everything falls apart, you know.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I would probably throw that plot out because, like, if I'm matching up with my counterparts in other territories to replicate ourselves, and we have the same varieties, if they're all harvested at around the same, where it gives you the best quality numbers, but one of them is harvested way dry, it it really does skew the data. So I guess what I'm trying to say, and I hope I'm making the point, is that it comes back to that harvest window. And
Mhm.
if your target is like, say, for your storage structure, like 65, 70%, if you hit that window, you're probably going to be just fine with your maturity, no matter what it is,
Yeah.
because I believe it's something like 55% of your yield comes from the ear portion of it. So like,
Okay.
why do you plant a big 110-day corn or something? Because you expect this big robust plant, I suppose. I think that's what people think. And so if you can get the results without having to go that long is what I think is what I'm trying to say. I hope I'm making it understood. I don't know. But
Okay.
then going to your point, maybe, is this
Mhm.
what you meant? Like if you plant like a longer day corn to a shorter day corn, you have a bigger window for the whole plant moisture. Like, you could start with the long stuff or I said that backwards. Start with the earlier stuff and finish with the long stuff and still have, is that kind of where you were taking that or?
Maybe. I think it was just referencing to the once upon a time perceived notion of BMR corn. One of the perceived advantages
Oh,
was that you had a longer harvest window.
because of the
Uh,
quality of the product, because of the
cor-
stock.
correct, correct. But I mean, talking through this, I think I understand what you're saying as well.
Yeah. And the other thing with just to maybe counter that part of the BMR thing with because it is a higher quality stock, or what am I trying to say? It's a lower lignin stock, so it'll be higher quality to the animal for eating.
Mhm.
But then if you take the lignin out, that lignin is what makes the plant stand.
Right,
So
the
if you leave it
structure.
out in the field longer, you open yourself up to wind events that would lay it flat.
Yes,
You don't
AKA
want to do
any
that.
Midwestern fall.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So then moving forward, I mean, you listed off really well, like what are the criteria, some common things to be looking for in these newer selections. Are you seeing that with some of these newer selections, the crossbreeding that yes, there's still the lignin in it. I mean, to our point earlier that you need the structure, you still need the plant integrity in line, but are we seeing still the digestibility carry through similar to like what we were going for with BMR? Are you seeing that come through in your new options?
I think you can. And it comes down to like a management issue.
Okay.
Um, like it, many years ago, people would be like, well, I'm just going to chop that field because it's a disaster or whatever. Farmers don't think like that anymore. They're very, proactive in their planning. And that's one of the reasons why they would use a BMR product. Like they'd be like, okay, we need 1,000 acres of really good corn silage. We're going to go with that. Well, you can still do that, or you can still get great quality. And it's the same thing. It comes down to planning and managing and executing the plan. So, it's not like um, um, I'm just going to go out and plant corn today and hope for the best. You start months ahead of planting, and so you want to try to get a balance between like the quality and the yield, like we were talking about, and then you may do that through like a dual purpose. I'll just use the term dual purpose. So so you may increase the plant population, so then it'll make a weaker stalk per se, or it could reduce the lignin in the plant. I've seen studies on how they plan on doing that. You could, as we were talking about earlier, use a lower test weight corn, or a corn with low test weight would be a softer starch kernel. And so that would be more digestible for the animal and be more readily absorbed by her, and then she wouldn't just pass it through. Um, so then you have those two factors in. Then you have, hopefully, because you're not just trying to get a germplasm that is specific to quality, but you're trying to rope in a good dual purpose. So then you're going to look at what are my disease problems? Is there northern corn leaf blight? Is there southern rust? Is there tar spot? So you're going to try to pick a hybrid that has like I said, like the lower starch or something, a nice plant with good yield potential, but also then would have like the disease protection you need for say tar spot. Like get something with a really good tar spot rating, because there's effects that will come down the line from that disease that infects you later in the season. So, that'll cause the plant to die early. Um, it'll cause problems with the grain. It could cause you'd be bringing in these diseased plants into your bunker or your silo or whatever you're putting it in. So you want to like address those needs when you're making that selection. Then you would also like look at, okay, what trait packages do I need? In my area is the corn borer problem. Is my area rootworm an issue because I'm planting multiple years of corn? Or so then you take all of those, and those are all like steps in the process. So you would, I guess what I would be counseling people today to do would be to be like, okay, where's my corn silage going? When can I get on? What mature, and when can I get it off? And then what are my um what are my challenges with disease issues and things of that nature. So then I'm going to look at what hybrids out there will give me the attributes I need to conquer those issues. And then once I get it out there, then as we were talking earlier, when can I get out there to harvest, get it off timely so I'm in the right moisture zone, and then I get a nice product on the pile, packed nicely because it's at the right moisture and it ensiles correctly. I guess that would be my big picture answer on that.
Bob, you have me chuckling because just to see the inside of not only your brain, but also then like seeing like the information process and like the little information tree kind of go through our brains as a fellow dairy farmer, I'm just like, I feel like sometimes I get overwhelmed. I can only imagine sitting in your seat or like a fellow plant geneticist trying to figure out how do we get in front of X, Y, and Z before next season. So, woof, yes. But I appreciate you kind of breaking it down. I know eventually you make a decision, you got to go with it, and you got to stick with it. But there's no such thing as a just within any operation. And this just kind of falls into that category of the make a decision, but here are some criterias to maybe make a sound, confident decision.
That's how you start. You make your sound, confident decision. But farmers are one of the most resilient groups of people I've ever been around because, like, you get weather events. It's like, okay, we'll go to plan B, and then that something bad happens. Okay, we'll go to plan C, and they got 3,000 acres to plant, and they can just roll with it. So,
Right.
all credit to them for that.
Those eternal optimists, we love them.
Yep.
Yes, yes, we
Amen.
do. And our spouses just look at us cross-eyed, so it's okay. It's okay. Well, Bob, as we round out today's discussion, one, thank you for joining us today, breaking down two you would seemingly very diverse topics, but really there's a lot of overlap between the decision making, the changes that coming down the pike, and obviously keeping a pulse on the weather and how do you manage based on the direction that they like to pivot to. But as we wrap up today's discussion, because again, we started off with alfalfa and now we're ending up on the corn silage dialogue. What would be your two key takeaways from today's discussion? Maybe one from each category, if you will.
Um, while management is key, like no matter what you're doing, you need to have a plan and have a way of executing that plan, um, keeping your options open, but then start to finish, it begins months before you go to the field, really, and then it ends after you have completed the process of harvest. So, like when you put it in a storage facility, whatever facility you're putting it in, you're gonna want to preserve it. That would be using some sort of forage preservative and things of that nature, so you can speed up the fermentation process and reduce the amount of heating, and heat is energy, and if there's a lot of that going on, you're gonna have loss. And so you work too hard to just see it go poof, you
Right.
you you want it all. And
Mhm.
so with that, there's many steps involved on any of those projects, alfalfa or corn silage or for grain for that matter. And you need to start at square one, and sometimes square one is the year before you're even in the field. And then you need to see it through, and a lot of times that's well past harvest. And in the storage of the products that we're talking about, or if it's grain, it's marketing grain, or I mean, it's a
Mhm.
very dynamic industry that we're a part of.
We keep it fun. That is for
Yeah,
sure.
if it was
Well,
easy, everybody would do it.
right. Farming looks easy when it's just done behind a pencil and paper. Wasn't that George
Yeah,
Washington's infamous quote? But absolutely. And honestly, Bob, thank you for being in this crazy, wacky industry with us. Thank you for tagging along, sticking it out, answering some of those questions. And as you'll be on site in several fields tomorrow. So thank you for what you do. And thank you to your team again at Rank Seat. So I appreciate you joining us today and sharing your expertise. We definitely value it. So thank you.
thanks for having us out. It was great to be here with you guys, and Hopefully I didn't get too wordy.
No, if nothing else, it gave folks another resource to rely on and reach out to, regardless if it's Bob Direct or even the team over at Rank Seeds. Again, thank you guys for sharing your expertise and knowledge today on the dairy signal. And as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you that there's a whole catalog, a whole bank, if you will, of topics and categories that have been done in the past on the dairy signal. So watch them, cruise through them at your convenience. Otherwise, you can always tune in live and see what topics are coming up every Tuesday and Thursday here on the Dairy Signal. All of this is made possible by our national sponsors and partners. So thank you guys. Thank you for walking with PDP throughout the calendar year, year after year. We appreciate all that you do to help make it possible. And another shout out to our April sponsor, specifically for the Dairy Signal. We appreciate DLF specifically for their partnership for this month. So thank you, everybody. Stay well, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple days here again on the Dairy Signal. Take care, everyone.